Here we go. All right. So welcome to the Coastal Conservancy Grantee Onboarding webinar. Congratulations on getting funding approval for your project at the April 23rd, 2026 board meeting. My name is Erin Gravely. I'm a project manager with our Central Coast team, and helping me out today on this webinar as well is Rachel Couch and Costula Valianos. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? All right. Okay, so the goal of today's webinar is to help you start, manage, and close your Conservancy grant. The primary audience is new grantees, but this is also a refresher for any returning grantees. The webinar will be recorded and the slides and link to the recording will be sent out later this week. You are welcome to leave your video on during this webinar. We will have scheduled question breaks after each larger section. To ask a question, you may raise your hand and unmute yourself during our scheduled question breaks, or add your question to the chat at any time. Please add a message to the chat or directly to me or Costula while I'm talking if you need any technical assistance. Next slide, please. Okay, congratulations on receiving a grant from the Conservancy. Thank you for the work that you do. We are very excited to help fund your project. Next slide. Everything that we're covering today is also outlined in the grantee manual found on our website under Grants, Resources for Grantees. This is shown by a yellow circle. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to your PM and they will be checking in with you as well. And Costula, if you happen to have that link handy, could you link to the Resources for Grantees page? And also, next slide. Great, thank you. So I'm going to quickly mention acquisition projects as they follow a different process from the rest of our grants. Grantees with acquisition projects should set up a time with your project manager to discuss the process for acquisition. The general process is to 1, execute the grant agreement, 2, provide the acquisition documents to the Conservancy review. Documents are listed on the screen and include an appraisal, preliminary title report, purchase and sale agreement, draft escrow instructions, and preliminary closing statement, among others. SCC will prepare a draft offer to dedicate, or OTD, and send that to you for review. The OTD will be recorded during closing to ensure that the property is used for the purposes outlined in the Conservancy's grant. Once all these items are finalized, the grantee can then submit an invoice request letter to the Conservancy. We have a template for this letter. This should be done at least 20 business days before close of escrow to ensure processing time. The check is mailed directly to escrow. Your project manager will send you resources, including an acquisition checklist. Again, I recommend setting up a time with your project manager to discuss the process. We can now take 1 or 2 questions about acquisitions if there are any. And again, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. May not be any acquisitions this time around. So next slide, please. Okay, moving on to the process for all our other projects: planning, implementation, Explore the Coast, wildfire programs, etc. This graphic provides a high-level view of our granting process that you will go through from start to finish. We will go into detail on each of these topics and we'll pause a few times for questions. Next slide. The first step is to execute a grant agreement, which outlines the terms and conditions of the grant between your organization and the Conservancy. You can review our typical grant conditions in the grantee manual while your project manager or PM is drafting your agreement. Please let them know if you have any questions. Your PM will send it in DocuSign for signature. Make sure you read the agreement before you sign. As part of this process, you will need to submit Standard Form 204, which provides us with the address where reimbursement checks will be sent. You need a 204 even if you've had a Conservancy grant before. The address on the 204 must match the information on your tax returns, so if you would like payment sent to a different address, please let your PM know. When your PM is drafting your agreement, it's important to discuss your project schedule with them, as they will be identifying 3 important dates that will be specified in your agreement related to the completion of the project and closeout of the grant. The first is the completion date, the date that all work that you plan to bill the Conservancy for will be complete. No work after the completion date can be billed to the grant. The final request for disbursement date, which is the date that you submit your final report and final invoice, also called the request for disbursement. Generally, this date is set 1 month following the completion date. And finally, the termination date. This is the termination of your contract with the Conservancy and is typically set 3 months after the work completion date. For construction projects, this date will be 20 years after the completion date, as the agreement requires that all improvements be in place and maintained for at least 20 years. Acquisition grants also extend out 20 years. Your grant agreement comes with a grant agreement number that will be used in invoicing and other documents. Next slide. Okay, after you have a grant agreement, next step will be the conditions precedent to disbursement. Next slide. Your agreement will have a conditions precedent section. You cannot start work until you have satisfied all of your conditions precedent and you have received a notice to proceed from your PM. The typical conditions are listed here, and we will go through each of these. Next slide. Board resolution. So the resolution tells us that your governing body has agreed to enter into this agreement with the Conservancy and identifies who is authorized to sign the grant agreement. There's a template online, but you may have your own version of this that you would like to use instead. Next slide. Insurance. We currently require $2 million in liability for construction projects and $1 million in liability for planning projects. The State Coastal Conservancy no longer needs to be listed as an additional insured. We just need to see proof of insurance. Insurance requirements may differ according to your grant. Refer to your agreement for the specific requirements. If it's a construction project, you may need to meet bonding requirements, but only if you contract with someone for more than $250,000. If you need specific insurance for this grant and it increases your premium, you can charge your Conservancy grant for that extra charge. Make sure that you talk to your PM about this and save documentation of this price increase. Next slide. Here's a list of common insurance minimums. We talked about general liability, but here are the minimums for automobile liability, workers' comp, watercraft liability, course of construction, or property insurance. These will be dependent on your grant. For instance, if you aren't using a watercraft, you don't need to get watercraft liability insurance. Refer to your grant agreement to see what your insurance requirements are and reach out to your PM if you have questions. Next slide. Okay, now we'll take a pause to take a few questions. And raise your hand if you have a question. Yeah, Kelly, you should be able to come off mute.
Thanks. For the conditions precedent, we are currently finalizing our planning grant and waiting for the regulatory agencies to give final approval for our permits. We're at like 90% design right now, just waiting for those final permits to get to 100 to start implementing our construction project. And so what we're wondering is, do we have to have the permits in hand in order to start charging to the grant, or because there is preparation needed before construction begins, or do we just need the permits before construction? So before we start charging to the grant or before construction begins is my question.
So for this specific situation, I would check in with your PM, but in general, for construction projects, you will need those copies of those permits in hand, and those will need to be reviewed prior to notice to proceed for construction. But again, I would check with your PM because there's sometimes a way to do some pre-construction work.
Right. Okay.
They'll be able to tell you, if that works for you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, great. I'm going to hand off then to Rachel.
Thanks, Erin. The next step is the work program for your conditions precedent. And the work program is a roadmap that defines the tasks, deliverables, project schedule, and task level budget for the project. It tells us how you'll complete the project, and it's the document that guides your invoicing. We have a template on our website, and when you open it up, you will see instructions on how to fill it out in orange. It may take a few drafts and revisions between you and your project manager to finalize. It is a living document, and it can be modified during the course of the project with approval by your project manager through submitting a request for a revised work program. Next slide. Within the work program, you'll need to include a project description, and it will provide a concise high-level summary of the project, stating its goals and what will be done to achieve them. It typically can be just one paragraph, but for more complicated projects, having a longer project description may be more appropriate. Use the description from the grant agreement or staff recommendations as a starting point. Next slide. Scope of work. You will then need to define the scope of work by task. Common categories of tasks for our grants are project management, which is essentially grant administration, design, community engagement, tribal engagement, environmental review, permitting, implementation, monitoring, etc. You can use subtasks to organize your activities if you'd like, but when you submit invoices, you will only be categorizing your activities under the overall task. You can work with your PM to tailor the tasks to fit your project. For each task, you will also define deliverables, which are documents that you will submit as part of the project. Next slide. You will provide a schedule, overall schedule for the project by task, and here is an example. As you can see, you'll use the task number, task title, and deliverables from the scope of work above and provide an estimated start and completion date for each item. This table will then be copied to the progress report to track deliverables. More on that later. Next slide. Next up is the budget for each task, which is a critical component of invoicing. This will be copied onto the request for disbursement. A simple budget allows for flexibility. You do not need to list the project costs from other funding sources in your work program unless matching funds are required by your grant. Your PM will ask separately for total project costs. Next slide. In the budget details section of your work program, you will describe what the budget will be used for. Your PM will use this to make sure all costs and activities billed for align with your approved tasks. Under direct expenditures, you will list out things like materials, equipment, travel, and food costs. Under staff time, list the job title and description of work for staff billing to the grant. In the work program, you don't need to provide information about hourly rates or number of hours worked. However, you will provide that information when you submit an invoice. For stipends, cash payment is allowed, but not things like gift cards or transit passes. Please check with your PM early if you plan to use stipends in your project. Subcontractors. You will need to provide the name of the subcontractor, their qualifications, usually via a website link, and a description of their work for review and approval by your PM. Indirect costs cannot be more than 20% of the total grant. Please make sure to work with your accountant to come up with an indirect rate that can be supported in case of an audit. With the climate bond, there are additional restrictions to follow, including any calculated indirect cost rate is allowed. Total indirect costs cannot exceed 20% of the grant. Total indirect costs cannot exceed a total of $1 million. Indirect costs may not be applied to acquisition costs, and indirect cost rates may be applied to only the first $100,000 of each subcontract. Please note that all organizations that receive funding from the Conservancy are required to meet strict accounting standards. While rare, there's always the possibility of an audit, so it's the responsibility of all grantees to use generally accepted accounting principles published by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Next slide. And finally, the plan for acknowledgement. The Conservancy requires physical acknowledgements such as signage for restoration and acquisition projects and softer acknowledgements for all projects, including communication materials that mention your project. Funding recognition out in the world for the public to see helps to ensure that future funding is made available to our programs. Note, this wraps up the conditions precedent section. We understand that the conditions precedent may take a lot of staff time. If this is a hardship, please talk to your PM about charging some staff time to your grant before you get your notice to proceed. Next slide. Next, notice to proceed. So once all of your conditions precedent to disbursement have been approved, your project manager will send you a notice to proceed or start work letter. Remember, you can't start work on the project until you receive this letter. You can then begin, once you receive it, you can then begin work on your project on the date shown on the letter. Work that occurs prior to this date cannot be billed to the grant. The exception is billing staff time for work on the conditions precedent preparation with prior approval from your project manager. Next slide. Now you can start work. Congratulations. Next slide. Are there any questions on this section? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Now I will hand it off to Kostula to present the next section.
Okay, the next section we're going to go over is the progress reports and invoicing, which is how you get paid and is a really important part of how we track your project. So how do you get paid? To get reimbursed for project expenses, you should invoice no more than monthly and no less than quarterly or every 3 months. Quarters are typically January through March, April through June, etc. But there is no set calendar as long as you bill at least every 3 months. The Conservancy enforces invoicing deadlines, and if you fall severely behind, there is a risk that you will be asked to stop work on your project until you get caught up on invoicing. A reminder that you may not invoice for work prior to the start date of the project and the date on the notice to proceed, as was mentioned previously. Invoices cannot cross over 2 fiscal years or a new fiscal year. Our fiscal calendar year runs from July to June, so you can bill up to June 30th, and then any work after that you'll include in your next invoice starting July 1. In other words, you can't have one invoice that covers both June and July. Invoices consist of the progress report, request for disbursement, also known as an RFD, and backup documentation that supports the expenses listed on the request for disbursement form. All documents should be combined into a single PDF and an email to invoices@sec.ca.gov and CC your project manager so they can review the documents. Send deliverables directly to your project manager in a separate email. The request for disbursement form. Here's an example of the RFD form. There are 2 pages to fill out. A cover page summarizes expenses from the billing period and overall funds spent. And the second page breaks down each expense by type. We have this form in both PDF and Excel format, and it can be found on our website. Page 1 of the RFD is shown here, and it summarizes all expenses from the billing period and funds spent to date. The address in blue in the upper left corner must match the address listed on the STD 204 or the payee data record form. This is the address where the checks will be sent, so it's really important that this address is correct and that your 204 form is up to date. If you'd like checks mailed to different addresses, like a PO box, ask your project manager about filling out an additional form. The task budget section highlighted in yellow should be copied from your work program. If task 1 is project management, the left column should say task 1 and project management, followed by the task budget in the next column. Cost incurred this period is the amount of costs you're billing to each task this period, and total cost to date are how much has been billed to each task to date. And finally, the remaining balance for each task is calculated for you. Our withholding policy recently changed. Previously, we withheld 5% from each invoice. Under the new current policy, we withhold the final 5% of the granted funds, or $100,000, whichever is less. Your request to release withholdings on your final invoice is noted by a check mark on this RFD, and you can see it highlighted here as well. The second page of the RFD further breaks down expenses listed on page 1. The first section lists all grantees' expenditures. This includes labor, subcontract, direct costs, so that's section A. Under labor, list each title, hourly rate, number of hours worked, task number. You don't need to submit timesheets, however, you should keep them in case of an audit. For subcontractor charges, you'll list the company name, the invoice number, amount, and attach their invoice as backup. And for direct costs, including materials, equipment, etc., you must attach a receipt for each cost. In section B, we have the indirect costs. The indirect rate must match the indirect rate listed in the work program. And now we'll get on to backup documentation. For subcontractors, invoices, that serves as your backup. They must include description of work and that was completed and how much it cost. A subcontractor provides a service through a contract with the grantee, and we have some examples here, as you can see, listing cultural resource specialist, community engagement facilitator, design consultant, all as examples, and they should be included in your work program or approved by your grant manager. Examples of other documentation include, as you can see here, receipts for things such as paid materials and supplies. Online purchases must be shown as shipped. Bank statements are not sufficient backup documentation. And please remember to save all your receipts. Travel reimbursement rates can be found on our website. To better support our grantees, we've updated our travel rates. If you've been awarded a grant with us before, be sure to check out the new rates. We reimburse personal vehicle mileage costs at state rate, which is currently at 72.5 cents per mile. The table over here shows an example of how to document mileage reimbursement. Please include the date, the locations, the mileage, and the total amount. Or travel can be reimbursed for gas with receipts and the cost of the rental car. Our lodging and per diem rates now match the federal rates. This information can be found on our travel reimbursement rates on our website, and we can also pay for parking fees and tolls that are incurred during your project. Again, receipts are all needed for all costs. All RFDs and invoices must include a progress report. We have a progress report template for you to use found on our website in the grantee manual, and the progress report is the same as the invoice, must be the same as the invoice billing period. In the progress report, you will provide an overall project update and describe progress made in that period per task. These descriptions should support costs billed, and the progress report also includes a deliverables table to track submittals. We do love photos and stories. Send them directly to your PM. Advance funds. Our grants are reimbursement based, meaning grantees incur costs and then we reimburse the grantee for those costs. We created an advance funds program in response to the needs of some of our grantees, particularly smaller nonprofits who are unable to cover the upfront costs of a project, as it would lead to significant financial burden. The Conservancy will prioritize recipient grantees serving disadvantaged, low-income, and under-resourced communities, organizations with modest reserves and potential cash flow problems. Please speak with your project manager if you would like to request advancement of funds. Please note that grantees must deposit the advance funds in a federally federally insured interest-bearing account for which deposits, including interest and withdrawals, are tracked. And finally, you've completed your project. So how does it all get closed out? For implementation projects, we typically require that the project manager conduct a site visit at the end of the project to review the completed work. But we also like to join in celebrating the completion of your project. So please invite us to any closing event, such as a community event or ribbon cutting. Next is submitting all the project completion documentation. You need to submit all the final deliverables to your project manager, your final request for disbursement and report, and make sure to check the box on the RFD to release the withholding. Finally, there are many guidance documents, templates, and examples on our website under resources for grantees, as well as our technical assistance page. And now we have time for your final questions. We explained it all, I guess. Okay. I guess this concludes our onboarding. We will stay on if you come up with a question you'd like to ask us. So we'll hang out here, but otherwise, this concludes our presentation.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Are these slides going to be emailed to us or available to us just for reference?
Yeah, they'll be on our website, so they'll get posted.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And Matt?
Hey, good afternoon. I thought of a question. Our project contemplates providing a stipend to support tribal engagement in our planning project. And I didn't see anything that was super obvious to document stipend-related expenses in the materials you presented. Is there a best practice or examples you can share? And if not now, I'm sure we can sort that out when we're working on the grant agreements. But I just thought I would ask since there seems to be plenty of time.
Yeah, we definitely allow for stipends, and depending on the type of stipend, we have a log, like if it's a community engagement process, that we can share a template with you. If it is a stipend that's more for a service of work, then there's a slightly different process for that. And so there's a couple ways that we can do it, and I'll work with you on that on our project.
All right, thank you.
I think there's also a little bit of guidance of how to document that you'd like to pay for stipends in the work program template. It's not a lot, but it'll tell you how to put it in the work program that you'd like to do that.
Okay, should we conclude this onboarding? Thank you all for attending, and definitely reach out to your project manager if you have any questions, and good luck with your projects.
Thank you again. Bye.
How do we stop recording?
Not sure. Oh, here, I got it.